Claire, a hard-working single mother juggling long shifts as a taxi driver, never expected her night to take a drastic turn. She had just finished a ride when she noticed an elderly man collapsed on the sidewalk. Without hesitation, she rushed to his aid and drove him straight to the hospital. She had no idea that this small act of kindness would set off a chain of events that would change both her life and her son's future in ways she never could have imagined. An hour later, as Claire pulled into her driveway, something felt off. Parked right outside her house was an ambulance, its lights off but unmistakably waiting. A team of paramedics and doctors stood nearby, their faces unreadable. Her stomach twisted. What was going on? But before we get to that, let me take you back to where it all started. Thanks! Have a great night, Claire said with a warm smile, accepting a tip from her latest passenger. Thank you, the elderly man replied in a soft, slightly shaky voice. His fingers trembled as he pushed the door open. Claire watched as he stepped out, his movements slow and unsteady. She lingered for a moment, making sure he was okay. The car door closed with a gentle thud, and she exhaled, relieved to have completed another trip. Glancing down at the crumpled bills in her hand, she quickly counted them. A smile tugged at the corners of her lips. This tip was the final piece she needed. A week of careful saving had finally paid off. But this wasn't just any savings. It was for Noah, her 10-year-old son. His birthday was tomorrow, and he had his heart set on a day at the amusement park. Claire had promised him she'd make it happen this year. As a single mom, she worked tirelessly to give Noah the childhood he deserved. Every ride she took, every tip she tucked away, it was all for him. Scraping together enough for the park tickets, a small gift, and a modest celebration hadn't been easy. But knowing she'd soon see the pure joy on her son's face made every effort worth it. Claire tucked the money safely into her purse and adjusted her seatbelt, ready to pull away. But as her eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, her heart jolted. The elderly man, the one she had just dropped off, was no longer upright. He was on the ground, one frail hand lifted weakly as if calling for help. There was no time to think. Claire killed the engine, threw the door open, and ran to him. His breathing was shallow, his face alarmingly pale. He looked so fragile, his body barely moving. She fumbled for her phone, quickly dialing 911. The operator's voice was calm but firm. An ambulance would take 10 to 15 minutes to arrive. Claire looked down at the man. He didn't have that long. Her mind raced. The hospital wasn't far, just a few minutes' drive. If she waited, he might not make it. Steadying herself, she carefully helped him into a sitting position. He was weak, but leaned on her, as she guided him back to the taxi. Once he was settled in the back seat, she jumped behind the wheel, gripping it tightly. Her knuckles turned white as she drove, silently pleading that she wasn't too late. The hospital came into view, and Claire didn't waste a second. She pulled up to the emergency entrance and hurried around to help him out. He leaned heavily on her as they made their way inside. At that moment, she had no idea how this night would change her life forever. As soon as Claire stepped inside, nurses rushed forward, assisting her in easing the elderly man into a wheelchair. A doctor quickly joined them, his eyes scanning over the frail figure with practiced urgency. "What happened?" one of the nurses asked, her voice calm but alert. Claire took a breath, still catching up with everything. "I found him collapsed on the street. He was walking fine just moments before, and then suddenly he went down." The nurses exchanged brief nods before swiftly wheeling the man through a set of double doors, disappearing into the treatment area. Claire stood frozen, her heart still pounding from the frantic drive. The weight of the moment settled over her as she exhaled a shaky breath. With the immediate crisis over, she finally allowed herself to sit down in the waiting area. The plastic chair was stiff and unwelcoming, but she barely noticed. The night had unraveled so fast, she hadn't even had time to process it all. She leaned back, exhaustion sinking into her bones. A few minutes later, a nurse approached, clipboard in hand. "Hi, are you the one who brought him in?" she asked, her tone professional yet kind. Claire straightened up. "Yes, that was me." The nurse offered a reassuring smile. "Well, he's stable. Nothing life-threatening. Most likely exhaustion and low blood pressure catching up with him." She glanced at her clipboard before adding, "He does need some immediate care, though. A few tests, some medication to help him recover." Claire nodded, relief washing over her. But then the nurse hesitated slightly before continuing. "The thing is, He doesn't appear to have anyone here to take care of the costs. It's not a huge amount, but we need to act quickly. Would you be willing to help? Claire's breath hitched. Her fingers instinctively tightened around the purse in her lap. Inside, tucked neatly away, was the week's worth of savings. Every tip, every fare, every late-night drive leading up to this moment. That money wasn't just cash. It was Noah's amusement park tickets, his birthday gift, the special day she had promised him. She could already see his excitement, hear his laughter as he explored the rides, feel his tiny arms wrapping around her in pure joy. Her gaze dropped to her purse, fingers hovering over the clasp. It felt like the weight of the world was pressing down on her shoulders. But then, another image surfaced, the elderly man's frail body, his trembling hand barely raised in a silent plea for help. Claire closed her eyes for a moment, steadying herself. Then, with a deep breath, she looked up and nodded. Yes, I'll cover it. The nurse's smile was warm. Thank you. We'll get everything taken care of right away. Claire handed over the money, her heart heavy but steady. She reminded herself that this was the right choice. A life, a person's well-being. How could she put a price on that? As the nurse walked away, Claire leaned back in her chair, her eyes fixed on the floor. A knot of sadness twisted inside her. How would she tell Noah? How could she explain that the special day she had promised was no longer possible? She pulled out her phone, scrolling through old pictures of him. One stood out, a snapshot from last year's birthday. Noah, holding a tiny cupcake with a single flickering candle, his face lit up with pure happiness. No amusement park, no big celebration, yet his joy had been boundless. A small, bittersweet smile touched Claire's lips. Maybe she couldn't give him the grand day she had planned, but she would find a way to make it special. She always did. After what felt like an eternity, the doctor finally stepped out from the treatment area and walked toward Claire. He's stable now, he said with a reassuring nod. Nothing too serious, just exhaustion. His blood pressure dropped, likely from fatigue and dehydration, but he's responding well to treatment. Once he's had a little more rest, we'll be able to discharge him. A wave of relief swept over Claire, her tense shoulders loosening slightly. That's really good to hear, she replied, exhaling a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The doctor hesitated for a moment before meeting her gaze. By the way, he asked about the person who brought him in. He wanted me to thank you on his behalf. It seems like you went out of your way to help. Claire offered a small, tired smile and shook her head. It was the least I could do, she murmured. With that, she turned toward the exit, her body aching from exhaustion. Her shift had ended hours ago, and it was well past midnight. All she wanted now was to get home. Noah would be waiting, even if he had probably fallen asleep by now. The thought of her son brought a brief flicker of warmth to her otherwise drained mind. But just as she reached the exit, a sudden thought made her stop in her tracks. She turned back, digging into her purse before pulling out a small, slightly worn business card. Making her way over to the reception desk, she extended the card to the nurse with a gentle smile. If he, or anyone in his family, ever needs anything, please let me know, she said. I don't live far, and I'd be happy to help in any way I can. The nurse took the card, her expression softening with appreciation. That's very kind of you. I'll make sure they get this. With that, Claire finally stepped out into the quiet night air, the hospital doors clicking shut behind her. The streets were empty, offering her a rare moment of reflection as she drove to her sister Anna's house to pick up Noah. Like many nights before, she was grateful to have Anna looking after him during her late shifts, knowing he was safe and cared for. As she pulled into the driveway, she took a deep breath, trying to shake off the exhaustion before stepping out. The second Noah spotted her, he sprinted toward the car, his face lighting up with excitement. Claire barely had time to open the door before he flung his arms around her. She hugged him tight, feeling the warmth of his small body pressed against her. But beneath her smile, a storm of worry churned in her mind. The ride home was filled with his cheerful chatter, his excitement overflowing as he talked non-stop about tomorrow. The amusement park, the rides, the games, he had every little detail planned in his head. Claire gripped the steering wheel a little tighter. She couldn't bring herself to interrupt him, not yet. But the truth sat heavy in her chest. The money she had spent so long saving was gone. It had gone to help a stranger in need, and now, the day she had promised Noah, the one he had been looking forward to for weeks, was no longer possible. Her mind raced as their house came into view. She rehearsed what she would say, searching for the right words that would explain everything without shattering his excitement. How do you tell a child that the day they had been dreaming of won't happen? Just then, something ahead made her stomach drop. Flashing red and blue lights painted the street in harsh, shifting patterns. An ambulance was parked right in front of her house. Claire's breath caught in her throat, her pulse quickening as fear gripped her chest. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. Claire's foot eased off the gas as her pulse began to race. Something felt off. Noah, sensing the sudden change in atmosphere, reached for her hand and held it tightly. The excitement that had filled him just moments ago faded into quiet confusion. As they stepped out of the car, Claire's eyes darted toward the group gathered near the ambulance. Doctors and paramedics stood nearby, their expressions unreadable, as if they had been expecting her arrival. Then, from beside the stretcher, a well-dressed man stepped forward. "Miss Claire?" he said, his voice warm yet serious. "I'm Daniel, this gentleman's son. My father insisted that we come here tonight to thank you personally. He told me what you did for him today, how you didn't hesitate to help when he needed it most." Claire's gaze shifted to the elderly man lying on the stretcher. He was weak, but his eyes held a quiet gratitude. Though he didn't speak, his expression alone conveyed the depth of his thanks. The medical team remained close, ensuring his safety, ready to transport him back to the hospital when needed. As they stood there, Daniel reached into his coat and pulled out an envelope. "My father wanted to show his appreciation in a meaningful way," he said, extending it toward her. "Please accept this. It's just a small token of thanks for what you've done." Claire hesitated, her hands unsteady as she took the envelope and carefully opened it. Inside was a check so large that for a moment, her breath caught in her throat. Her mind struggled to process what she was seeing. It didn't seem real. I can't accept this," she stammered, quickly shaking her head. "I didn't help him expecting anything in return." She tried to hand the envelope back, but Daniel gently placed it back in her hands. "That's exactly why you should," he said with a knowing smile. "You never asked for anything, and that's why you deserve it. This is for you and your son, to make life a little easier." Claire looked toward the elderly man once more. He met her eyes and gave a slow, approving nod, his expression warm and encouraging. It was as if he was silently urging her to accept it. She ran her fingers along the edges of the envelope, trying to ground herself, to confirm that this was real. A mix of relief, disbelief, and overwhelming gratitude settled over her. Finally she nodded. Her voice was quiet but steady. Thank you so much. I don't even know what to say." Daniel offered a small smile. "You don't have to say anything, just accept it." The elderly man smiled back at her, his gratitude shining through tired eyes. Moments later, the doctors carefully helped him back into the ambulance. Claire stood watching as they secured him, her mind still spinning from the turn the night had taken. As the ambulance doors closed and the vehicle pulled away, silence settled over the street. Claire remained still, standing under the dim glow of the streetlights, letting everything sink in. She had acted on instinct that night, never once expecting anything in return. And yet, kindness had found its way back to her in a way she never could have imagined. For the first time in what felt like forever, the constant weight of worry lifted from her chest. The check in her hands wasn't just money, it was a chance to give Noah the life he deserved. A childhood free from struggle, filled with joy, warmth, and endless opportunities. She could see it now, his dreams no longer just wishes, but real possibilities. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us share more inspiring stories like this one. Thank you for watching.